If this video doesn't make you want to social distance, I don't know what else would. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I am going to talk about post-COVID syndrome. Is it real? Is it just a figment of all of our imagination? I'm going to get all this sorted out. So first of all, is post-COVID syndrome real? And the answer, unfortunately, seems to be a very resounding yes. It was long suspected because it was seen in a very similar coronavirus called SARS in the 2002 outbreak. And of course, in late June 2020, people's suspicions started to get confirmed because there were some long-term studies that were performed in survivors of coronavirus, and it was noted that there was a chronic fatigue syndrome-like illness in healthcare workers. Later, this phenomenon became so widely known that such patients became colloquially known as long haulers. And even hospitals started opening up post-COVID wards. So it started with Mount Sinai in New York City, and they opened the Center for Post-COVID Care, and let me tell you, that has a wait list a mile long from all over the country, even all over the world. This is a serious problem, and it's even more serious than you'd think. Let's get into what the science says. So there were studies in France, in Italy, in the US, all over the world, proving the exact same point. And that point is that a majority of COVID patients wind up with long-term effects. Every month, we seem to be finding out more long-term effects that result from COVID. So let me just summarize it. So these studies, for those curious, included between 120 and 325 patients. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but it is statistically significant. And it's even more so if you consider that all the studies had very similar results. So let's dive in, shall we? The first study by Carvalho noted that at day 30, 68% of patients suffered from at least one symptom of post-COVID syndrome. Usually it was lack of energy, difficulty breathing, symptoms like that. And the crazy thing is that 30 days later, so on day 60, 2 months after testing positive, 66% had at least one symptom. As for lack of energy, they found half on day 30 and about 40% on day 60. And the authors actually noticed their sample was younger on average, so the number has shown to be even higher in other studies. So the other French study by Garrigue et al. Showed memory loss in 34% of cases, sleep disorders in 30.8%, and difficulty with concentration in 28%, which is not insignificant. That's insane. That's around a third. So in the US, a study by Tenford et al. Has shown that a third report not returning to normal state of health. This study was performed in June. So you had patients who were 4 months post-COVID, 5 months post-COVID, all the way down to a few days post-COVID. If you dive into the over 50 crowd, you end up with almost half. And these statistics get even scarier if you enter the realm of people with comorbid chronic diseases, obesity, and comorbid mental illness. So it's quite shocking. You end up with over 57% claiming they have not returned to a normal state of health. So I know what a lot of you guys are asking is, if the patient has a worse case of COVID, does this mean they get worse post-COVID? And studies are very conflicted on this. Some say yes, so the Carvalho study says yes. The other French study by Garrigue says no, not necessarily, or it's inconclusive. And so this is the crazy, insane part. And I'm just like in shock. I'm blown away. I didn't know they knew this much about chronic fatigue syndrome. They've done autopsies on people who've died of COVID, and they have shown that the virus had crossed the blood-brain barrier through the nose. And that is nuts. And no, it's not because of test swab puncturing the membrane or some nonsense like that. That's not what happens. Seriously. It does wind up crossing the blood-brain barrier. I mean, that doesn't shocked me because viruses are so tiny, and this is shown to happen with the Epstein-Barr virus, the cytomegalovirus, and this is why you get chronic fatigue syndrome that is very often associated with a viral infection. And the other crazy thing is that since the virus crosses the blood-brain barrier right next to the hypothalamus, which is the big regulatory center for the brain, so it regulates like temperature, sleep and wake cycles, and all those things tend to get a little messed up when you get chronic fatigue syndrome. And interestingly enough, the fact that the COVID enters the brain through the nose, which leads directly to the olfactory cortex, which is the smell center of the brain, and the taste center of the brain is not too far away from that. That actually could explain why COVID patients often lose their sense of smell and taste. Mind blown. Another fascinating, mind-blowing fact is that the prefrontal cortex, the area in charge of cognition in the brain, is right next to the olfactory area of the brain. It's like right on top. And guess what? Post-COVID syndrome leads to cognitive dysfunction. It leads to profound unremitted anergy or asthenia, which are fancy words for lack of energy. And all of these are symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. But here's an additional layer to this on top of the chronic fatigue syndrome. The immune system reacts to the virus. It produces cytokines, which are chemical messengers for inflammation and infection that the immune system sends out to elicit an immune response. And yes, this is the same cytokines that occur in the cytokine storm. Are y'all with me? So what happens is you get kind of a cytokine storm in your brain, and that creates all kinds of dysfunction. And that just ends up, your brain just becomes a hot mess, okay? And on top of that, your brain, by the time you're done fighting off COVID, it's had enough. It's called post-exertional neuroimmune exhaustion. And if that sounds like how you feel after running a marathon, it's kind of because it is, basically. It's like you after your kid had like a 2-day long temper tantrum. You're just done. You're just like, I would do anything to get a little bit of peace and quiet up in this place. You know, that is your immune system. And sometimes eventually, if it's just too long, it just goes crazy. This sounds a little bit like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune diseases. That's basically because it's often a similar mechanism, and viruses are very frequently behind that mechanism of pathogenesis. Those of you who haven't had COVID yet, let me tell you, COVID is no joke. And no, I've not had COVID, but I've heard from those who have had COVID that it really depends on the case. Some people get basically like nothing, and some people get in the ICU, and you never know which one you're gonna get. Are you down for playing this kind of Russian roulette? Are you down with having like chronic fatigue syndrome for the rest of your life? Because let me tell you, chronic fatigue syndrome, from people that I know who've had it, it is a nightmare. It is like you have to live with this for the rest of your life. It's not worth it. What you might think is just an innocent night out, that who cares, you'll just get the disease and recover. It's not a given. So it's really better to stay safe than sorry. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see y'all next time.